Yeah, hopefully some of you got to see the message this weekend, and I shared what the passage was, which a game changer for me. It was, very radically different, and I'll share a little bit about that. But that passage I'd like to share with you, it's in Romans 10:9 to 13, and I'm going to read it. I read it over the weekend, but I want to read it again for you. And it says this: If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That's pretty basic. Then it goes on, for it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. As scripture says, anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. And then Paul kind of repeats himself a little bit in verse 13, where he says, For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That's very basic, pretty straightforward, as Paul has shared that from the book of Romans. And that was the game-changing section of Scripture that brought a radical difference to my life. What was my life like before that passage? It was pretty crazy. I did not grow up in a Christian home. I moved out of my house when I was 18 or 19, got involved with a lot of stupid, sinful things, and I was dating different girls, and this one girl was uniquely different, and she was a believer, a Christian, and she started sharing Christ with me, and I thought, well, whatever. But anyway, she was real close to her youth pastor, and that youth pastor, basically told her to dump me, which was probably good advice because I was not a good influence. And she went off to college. But what I did is I started meeting with that youth pastor every Thursday afternoon for about a year. I was a legitimate seeker to find out who Christ was. And after probably a year being challenged by him, he challenged me to make a decision for Christ. In this verse, these 3 or 4 verses here were the verses that were used by God to reach my heart. When those meetings on those Thursday afternoons, I was reading through the New Testament. I was a legitimate seeker, but I also read some stuff by C.S. Lewis. And that one, I don't even know what you call it, but it's a way that he framed something that really stuck in my life. And I can go back 50 years and it still is part of me. And C.S. Lewis said, when it comes to Jesus Christ, you only have really one of 3 options. Either he was a lunatic, a liar, or he was the Lord. And so you think about that. Okay, we have all these claims of Christ that said he was God. And was he lying about that? Was he deceiving the disciples and all of the men and women that were around him? Or was he a crazy man, a lunatic, claiming to be Christ? Or was he who he said he was? And that is Jesus Christ, the Lord, the Messiah, God in the flesh. And that's the decision I made using these verses. Declare with your mouth and believe in your heart that the Lord Christ has been raised from the dead, and you will be saved. I put my faith in that verse, and it's been a radical change since then. What's different about me after that passage was really my whole life changed. I moved out of my apartment that I was living with my 2 buddies that were leading me down the wrong path. And I still struggled quite a bit, even after I became a Christian, to live the Christian life. And I can remember very specifically an incident where I just felt like I wanted God and I wanted Jesus to be what I would call the Lord of my life. I wanted him to be first in everything because I was kind of half-hearted, kind of miserable. And I remember getting down on my knees next to my bed in the house that my wife and I got after we were married, a couple of months after, and just asking God to be first in my life. I wanted him to be on the throne of my life. I wanted him to be first in every area, how I spent my money, what I did with my time, who I hung around with, my own personal devotional life, but him to be first. And that was a radical change for me, which ultimately, we can spend hours talking about this, but that's actually what led me into full-time ministry. And many of you know that this October I'll have been at High Desert Church 40 years, and that's a long time. And a wonderful ministry. Life's been radically changed after that. But that verse in Romans 10:9 was a radical game changer for me. Radically changed my life, led me in a different direction, and to be a full follower of Christ. Yeah, just in closing, I would really challenge you. Maybe there might be some people watching this that have never really made that decision to become a Christian, or maybe you're even struggling with your mixed, half hearted heart towards Jesus Christ. And my challenge to you is go full in. Let's go full into this. Don't be a half hearted believer because honestly, I think your life's going to be miserable. And so I look at that verse again and I'll repeat it to you. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That's pretty simple. And the Christian life is not a simple life, but that principle of coming to Christ is. And I would just remind you, challenge you to make that decision if you haven't ever made that decision. Let's do it, even today.